I was working the night shift at my local Woolworths, back when it stayed open 24 hours a day. Normally, fewer than 10 customers drifted through during my shift, but I wasn't allowed to sit idle. No, they demanded I work on stock whenever I wasn't serving someone. It was a sprawling, cavernous store. So often there might be just one other soul inside, maybe a stock worker or cleaner, swallowed by the silence. That night, though, I was utterly alone. I stood in the cereal aisle stacking boxes when a faint crash echoed from the next aisle over. Something had toppled from the shelf. The store's sliding doors always shrieked like banshees when they opened, loud enough to wake the dead, so I hadn't heard anyone enter. It jolted me. A customer? Maybe. Not strange yet. Then I glanced left. At the aisle's edge stood a man, his blank stare boring into me, unblinking. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. No," he muttered. Could you just point me to the eggs?" He wasn't normal. His face, it wasn't ugly, just wrong. His upper lip jutted out too far, almost cartoonish, like a grotesque parody of a human, a living caricature from some twisted nightmare. Unease coiled in my gut as I realized I'd have to ring him up. I rushed to finish the cereal aisle, desperate to escape his gaze. When I was done, I gripped the U-boat cart and started toward the back room. Halfway there, he emerged from the shadows, cutting me off in the middle of the aisle. He was in his mid-30s, I guessed. I was only 22, though I looked younger. Too young, maybe, for the way his eyes lingered. He stopped me, his voice slithering into awkward small talk. "What's your name?" he asked. "How old are you? Do you go to school? Why the night shift?" Then the questions turned darker. "Do you go to parties a lot? Do you have a girlfriend?" I said no, my throat tightening. "Have you ever had a boyfriend?" He pressed, his hand landing on my shoulder, heavy and cold. I jerked away, shoving the cart forward. "I'm not into whatever you're thinking," I snapped, my pace quickening. He followed, a shadow stalking me, relentless. I broke into a near run until I reached the back storage room. He didn't cross the threshold. I wasn't supposed to linger there. Customer theft, they said. But I stayed, heart pounding. Eventually, I decided to wait by the register, hoping he'd buy his damn eggs and vanish. 20 minutes crept by. He never came. Had he stolen something? Left? I didn't care anymore. I needed the bathroom. I jogged to the back, slipped into the employee restroom, and locked myself in a stall. Moments after sitting down, the door creaked open. My heart plummeted. I swallowed a scream, some half-formed plea like, "You can't be in here!" But fear silenced me. I lifted my legs, hiding my feet from view under the stall. Time stretched, agonizingly still. I stared at the floor, frozen, until I dared to look up. An eye, his eye, peered through the crack in the stall door, glistening, unblinking, a predator's gaze. I screamed, trapped, one chance. My hand fumbled for the box cutter in my pocket. I slid the blade through the crack, forcing that eye to retreat. Then I slammed the stall door into his face and bolted, racing out of the bathroom, out of the store, into the night. I called my boss 5 times before he answered, my words spilling out in a frantic rush. "Call the cops," he said. I did. By the time they arrived, the man was gone, vanished like a phantom. I worked the night shift twice more after that, each hour a torment, but he never returned. I was lucky. Too lucky. I used to work the night shift at a gas station, perched on the edge of a desolate highway in the middle of nowhere. From midnight to 6 a.m., the road lay dead. Maybe 1 or 2 lost souls stumbling in to pay cash all night. It was a bleak, soul-crushing job, especially on the graveyard shift. I just finished college, drowning in loans, and the extra $5 an hour my boss tossed me was the only thing keeping me there. One frigid December night,
I sat behind the counter, flipping through a newspaper, fiddling with my phone. Anything to kill the emptiness. Then headlights pierced the dark. A red pickup truck lurching off the highway into the lot. A figure stepped out, slamming the door. I glanced up, then back down, figuring he'd pump gas and leave. Minutes passed. I looked again. He stood by the pump, motionless, staring at it. Confused, maybe? I almost went out to help. Almost. Then a chill slithered up my spine. The man, towering over 6 feet, turned his head slowly toward me. His face was a void, a black abyss where features should have been. He was watching me. I buried myself in the paper, pretending not to notice. But my hand shook. Just pay and go, I begged silently. When I dared to look again, he was closer, much closer, standing rigid near the door, still staring, still faceless. My breath caught. I staggered to the door, locked it, flipped the open sign to closed. Screw the consequences. Fear clawed at me, raw and primal. I retreated behind the counter, sinking low so he couldn't see me, so I couldn't see him. 5 minutes dragged by, an eternity of texting friends, pleading for someone, anyone, to be awake. When I finally peeked out, he was gone. Relief flooded me, until I stood. He was there, pressed against the glass, a shadow made flesh. I screamed, lunging for the phone, dialing the police. The operator hesitated. My story sounded insane, but I convinced them. Huddled behind the counter, I heard it. Thuds, heavy and deliberate, battering the door. Not knocks, blows, then silence. A car engine roared to life, tires screeching as he fled. 2 cops, a patrol officer, and a state trooper rolled in soon after. I stammered about the red pickup, the direction it went, but his face? Nothing. Just darkness. They couldn't do much. He hadn't done anything. Yet. I quit a few months later, fleeing to a job in the city, desperate to leave that nightmare behind.
It was 2 years ago. I got dragged into a night shift at a 7-Eleven, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., covering for someone who bailed. The store sat on a busy road in a rural nowhere, quiet as a grave at night. You'd get 10, maybe 20 people, mostly drunks grabbing beer. That night, a guy in his mid-20s stumbled in, howling strange, guttural noises. I figured he had a mental disability. My brother's the same, so pity hit me first. He shuffled to the counter, empty-handed, head tilted toward me, but eyes rolled up to the ceiling, whites gleaming. My skin crawled. I tried talking to him, but he just bellowed louder. No one waited outside, no cars in the lot. He'd walked here, alone. He stood there, too long, staring upward, groaning, a broken machine of a man. I shoved a bag of chips at him. "Take it and go," I said, voice tight. I fumbled for a number to call. Someone, anyone, to help him. Then, abruptly, he turned and shuffled out into the dark. Guilt gnawed at me, but so did unease. An hour later, the counter phone rang. I answered. Those same yells blasted through the line, sharp and mocking. A prank? I slammed the receiver down, paranoia sinking in. I scanned the windows constantly, shadows twisting in the corners of my eyes. At 4 a.m., my replacement arrived and I fled home, exhausted, dumping my stuff on the table. The phone rang, a minute after I walked in. 4 a.m. Who calls at 4 a.m.? Dread gripped me. I answered. Him again. Those screams, relentless, burrowing into my skull. I smashed the phone down, nausea rising. All night I felt watched, blinds shut tight, strange noises echoing through the house. Sleep didn't come until dawn. Weeks later, I'd nearly forgotten, until I went to the basement. Papers littered the floor, scattered like a madman's work. In the closet, scrawled in Sharpie, was 7-Eleven. The store's address. My address. Worse. Kitchen knives and a jagged pocket knife sat there, waiting. He'd been here,
living below me. For how long? Whatever he'd planned, he'd abandoned it. And me. I haven't seen him since. He's out there, though, sick and dangerous, a ghost I can't unsee.
I've worked the canine unit for 9 years. Plenty of graveyard shifts under my belt. I've seen oddities in the dark, but one night haunts me still. I was with Sammy, my German shepherd, just 2 years old and green like me. We cruised a lonely road, crops towering on both sides, when I spotted a white van parked deep in the fields, both doors gaping wide. Suspicious. I flashed my lights. Nothing stirred. I parked, grabbed Sammy, and crept closer. She went berserk at the van's trunk, yanking her leash taut. I popped it open. A wave of rot hit me. Foul. Suffocating. 7 body bags lay inside, feet protruding from each, pale and still. I radioed for backup, gagging. A twig snapped nearby. Sammy tore free, charging into the crops, barking wildly. I drew my gun and stumbled after her, stalks slashing my face, each rustle a threat. Her barks faded. I stopped, breathless. The sounds didn't. Movement. Everywhere. Circled me. Unseen. Terror seized me, cold and absolute. I froze as it stilled. Then arms clamped around my throat, choking me, dragging me toward death. Sammy's bark split the night, followed by a man's scream as her jaws sank into his leg. Instinct took over. I spun and fired. He crumpled, dead. I snatched Sammy and ran, pursued by unseen footsteps, back to the car. I drove a quarter mile, heart hammering, not looking back. Backup came. The van was gone. No plate, no trace. My first months on the force, and I'd let killers slip away. I fled like a coward, valuing our lives over duty. It gnaws at me still. How I failed. How they're still out there, shadows in the night.